McGregor, your Member of Parliament for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford. And here I am in Ottawa on our last day before I return home next week to hopefully see a lot of you in the riding. I'm really looking forward to returning to our beautiful part of Vancouver Island. So this week we had a lot of debate on climate change, and rightfully so, because as we all know from all the scientific evidence that's out there, if we don't change our emission trends, we are on track to hit anywhere between 3 to 5 degrees of warming by the end of this century. And we know what kind of catastrophic effects those can have. We're already starting to see the effects with droughts, with flooding, our forest fire budget in British Columbia. Those are only going to get worse. And we're going to see an ecological and economic disaster on par with nothing else that we've ever experienced before. So the time to act is now. We don't have much time left. We have to see that policy that actually reflects the scientific reality that's out there. And so we spent a lot of time this week debating motion, both from the NDP and from the government, on declaring the climate change a climate emergency. Now, today, unfortunately, the government decided not to be debating that so-called urgent motion that they had brought forward only yesterday. And so I tried a couple of times today, once in question period to raise this issue, but also at the end of question period during routine proceedings, I asked the Speaker for an emergency debate on this subject. Unfortunately, I wasn't successful, but I can assure you that as your Member of Parliament, this issue continues to be of great importance to me. It's reflected in the fact that we had a climate strike today in the city of Duncan, and many of our youth, this is the #1 priority for them. So I'll be back in the riding next week, but I can assure you upon my return to Ottawa the week following that, we will be following up with the government on this, making sure that our policies reflect the reality that we need to see, and also to do justice to future generations. Thank you everyone for being the wonderful constituents that you are, and I look forward to seeing you next week when I'm back in the riding. Take care.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, we have a climate crisis before us with current global warming trends predicting a global increase of between 3 to 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Canada's youth are looking to us, the elected officials, to embrace the crisis that's putting their futures in jeopardy with the same urgency that they are feeling. The government claims to understand that there's a climate emergency, but they refuse to debate the issue today, and they voted against the NDP's motion earlier this week. When will the government put some action behind their words and treat this crisis with the urgency that it deserves?
Parliament Secretary to the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change.
Speaker, the fact is climate change is real, the consequences are serious, and we are facing an emergency today. We don't need to look to the end of the century to understand that people are feeling the consequences in our community. We can look at storm surges on the East Coast, floods in New Brunswick, heat waves in Quebec and Ontario, forest fires in the West, and glacial melt in the North. We are feeling the impacts today, and it is costing us dearly. Mr. Speaker, we have put forward a plan with more than 50 concrete measures that's going to bring our emissions down, strengthen communities, make life more affordable, and do right for the next generation. With respect to the NDP's motion, there were fatal flaws to it because they did not do their homework and understand that the consequences would shut off electricity to Indigenous.
And we'll now go to the Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to give notice under Standing Order 52.2 that I am seeking leave to propose an emergency debate on the urgent need for Canada to declare that the country, and indeed the globe, is in a state of environmental and climate emergency. I'm not sure that there's ever been a more obvious need for such a debate, Mr. Speaker, as both members of this House, along with the preponderance of the scientific community, as well as everyday global citizens, agree that the planet is in crisis and that governments need to step up and address the situation with a much greater sense of urgency. We know that NDP members, through our motion that was tabled this week, believe that the declaration of an environment and climate emergency is necessary. Our motion also includes tangible action, prioritizes reconciliation, and commits to making sure no worker and no community is left behind. We know that the members for Saanich Gulf Islands, the members of the Bloc Québécois, and the member for Nunavut all supported that motion as well. We know that the Conservatives put forward a motion this week that reads in part that climate change is real and urgent global problem. We know that the Liberals have put forward a motion that claims, much like the Conservatives, that climate change is a real and urgent crisis.
The motion goes on to have the House declare a national climate emergency, but again, much like the Conservatives, without much in the way of tangible action, nor an increase in the tepid ambition of the Liberal government's approach. We also know, somewhat bizarrely, that in the government House leader's Thursday statement on the upcoming business of the House, there was zero mention of the government's climate emergency motion coming back before the House. She said that today's debate would be on the CBSA oversight bill, which the NDP believes is important and will support, but it makes you wonder how much of an emergency the climate motion really is for the government. Furthermore, the government House leader made no mention of the motion coming back for debate and vote after next week's constituency week. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we know that the Liberals have a rich history of talking a big game on environmental action. Exhibit A in this case is being the admission of former Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Chrétien, Eddie Goldenberg, that the Liberals' decision to sign the Kyoto Accord was a publicity stunt. Mr. Speaker, faced with the facts about the seriousness of the climate crisis, I believe it's essential that Canada declare that we are an environmental and climate emergency. And given that the government seems intent to leave their motion on the sideline to debate matters of greater urgency to them, I believe that the House, through you, Mr. Speaker, should grant this emergency debate request to affirm the level of urgency that is required. As always, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your careful consideration of this request.
I thank the honourable member for Cowichan Malahat Langford for his request and certainly bringing attention to a matter that, in fact, the House has been quite seized with as of late. Certainly the limits of the requests for emergency debates are outlined and very prescribed in the standing orders. In this case, his request does not meet the requirements of the standing orders, and so I urge him, being mindful of the fact that there, as he mentioned, there is still a motion that's before the House that will presumably be taken up at some point in time, that there will be opportunities to take up consideration of the subject that he proposes. The